Hi, welcome to NDE TV. I'm Peggy Robinson. Today's guest is William Peters, and he has a best-selling book on shared death experiences. But he's also had a near-death experience, so we're anxious to hear everything he has to tell us. Hi, William.
Hey, Peggy. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. So you can start wherever you like.
Oh, okay, great. Well, you brought it up right away that my research is and the publications are in the share death experience. But I got started in this field rather reluctantly, kind of forced into it through my NDEs. There's two of them, but maybe I'll just start with the first one. I mean, I was living a fairly normal middle class, upper middle class life in the Bay Area of San Francisco. And I went up skiing one weekend in between Christmas and New Year's. And I was at 17 years old, so pretty typical, active, energetic, very athletic young man. And I was skiing down the mountain, and I caught an edge at relatively high speed. And as I caught the edge, I mean, I still have this image emblazoned in my mind. I could see the front of my skis crossing. I could see the back of my skis crossing, and that's kind of a strange thing to have happen. So I saw the back of my skis starting to cross, and I mid-course corrected, as they say. So I tried to adjust, and then by doing that, I crossed up the front of my skis, and that's the worst you can do. That creates a catapult. And so I launched into the air. And while it was exhilarating, I also had this sense that this isn't going to end well. And so when I hit the ground, my skis, unfortunately, bindings did not release, and my back crunched. I heard the crunch in my back, and everything went dark. In that darkness, it was like, I don't know, maybe your listeners will remember the MASH television show. When that mobile medical unit would get basically bombed, the electricity would all go out. It would go zzz, and everything would turn dark. And that's what it felt like in my body. That was the analogy. It was like, oh my gosh, all the light, all of the energy. I didn't even know there was light in my body, but it just went away. And I was just sitting there in this darkness, no pain, no feeling, but I had this observing sense of self. Like I was watching this. So the sense of an observer watching my experience was right there. The next thing I realized was that the lights were starting to come back in, and I could see my body down below on the ski slope. I was above it, but I was moving away rapidly. So I saw my body, then the ski area, then Lake Tahoe. This was in Squaw Valley ski area. Then I saw the San Francisco Bay Area, and then the beautiful Colorado snow-covered Rockies that time of year, and soon a satellite view of continental North America. And as I was moving away from planet Earth, I realized, oh, wait a minute, there's a review of my life going on. And I was seeing in intricate detail movie snippets, video snippets of my life.
Isn't that amazing how that works on the other side?
Uh,
I find it
it,
fascinating.
fascinating, fascinating. And I was just enamored. I was like, oh, wow, everything right here. Even scenes I did not remember. They showed me a lot of things. I say they. I don't know if that's, well, who that they is. I think it's kind of this, that's a whole nother question about the they. But the movie was revealing actions that most of what I remembered, but then it also revealed the karmic impact. Like a little example, I'm like 6 years old, and I'm in a big wheel bike in my neighborhood, one of those, riding around, and I deliberately crash into my neighbor. I was just angry or upset or something, 6 or 7 years old, whatever. And I really knock him off his bike, and he starts crying. And he runs inside his house, and he tells his mom, and his mom gets all upset. And she goes and yells at the husband. And the husband then gets upset about something else. And I'm just like, wow, there's the trickle effect, the ripple effect of karma.
That. You just knew you crashed into him, I assume.
That's right. That's all I remember was like, oh yeah, I do remember that. It's weird. First I'm like, oh wow, I remember that. That was boy, that's kind of a weird detail to remember. And then I'm realizing later, remembering is not what's going on here. It feels like remembering, but I'm actually being shown my life. Yeah. And then the implications of my actions and behaviors. And I had a lot of those. I had a lot of those teachings about, kind of mean behavior, not kind behavior. And there were a lot of good things too that happened, but for whatever reason, mine was a lot about realizing I could have been a lot kinder person. So
we've all heard enough of these to understand now that we are to conclude we are being closely, not just watched, but monitored. And like it's all getting, lined up, like ducks in a row for, these experiences.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It's, I think we're all accountable here. And I think the wisdom tradition,
there's no judgment. I'm like, you're not listening.
Yeah. I mean, I have a piece about that too, which I'll share. Because I don't think judgment is the right term for it. I think accountability, but what's interesting is that the accountability does not come in any punitive form. It's just like a loving look at yourself.
Right. But it's there.
And then a desire. Pardon me?
But something's there observing us doing these dirty little secrets.
Yeah, no, I don't think if you think you're going to get away with anything in this life, I don't think that's true. But I think the more important thing that I've come to learn is that, yes, everything's recorded. We are accountable. But when we are accountable, we come before these higher powers and they're loving. They
care that we know where we went wrong.
And they're there to give us, free will to work it out. And I think that's why so many of us come back to Earth, is to work this stuff out.
I wonder if people will interpret that as, well, I'll just be bad, so I'll get a do-over.
Yeah, I don't think that's a good policy either. But let me continue with it.
I mean to interrupt. I just like that. Wait a minute. Let's pause here a second. Because, people hear these and I know they just want to sit and listen. And I understand that. But this is important stuff.
Well, yeah, I think it gets to the meaning and purpose of a human life. Yeah. Because people wonder while we're here.
I want people to see this and understand what they're hearing and pause for a second and think about what he is saying here. And I know they've all heard it so many times in that life review. That's where it comes up. So go right ahead.
Yeah. So as the life review is going on, I all of a sudden, realize that I'm in this absolutely gorgeous galaxy. Planets moving around, comets. It's like, wow, this is super alive, beautiful, brilliant. It's warm, it's comfortable. I'm enthralled. And then I'm realize, oh, I'm in this tunnel. I can see right through the tunnel into the galaxy. It's kind of like a slinky type winding tunnel, if you will. And then I see the light.
Going through it?
Pardon me?
Was you slowly going through the tunnel?
No, I was going pretty quickly. I mean,
was there any sound as you're being shown this life review?
No, I mean, there's kind of a hushing sound. There is a bit of a buzz or a hush, but it's it's not the dominant experience. It's in the background. The dominant experience is more visual and sensorial. And so when I finally, I say finally, I'm in this tunnel. I'm looking through the tunnel into out the sides of the tunnel, if you will.
I did too.
At the beautiful
I
galaxy.
did too.
And
You
it's
can
just,
see
just
through it.
enamored.
It was in something, but it was like transparent. You see through it.
Exactly.
And I'm like you. What was going on inside it was more focused than outside. It was just a second thing. I know what you mean.
Yeah. And so when I finally see the light, it's a pinprick of light, and I cast my eyes on the light, and I'm like, wow, the light. And then all of a sudden it gets bigger. And then at some point I realized, oh my gosh, I'm dying. And in that moment that I realized I'm dying, I have a really big emotional reaction. And it's like, I just start screaming at God. And it was kind of like, God, don't, it's a primal scream. God, don't let me die. And in knowing that I'd been in this space hundreds, if not thousands of times before, and I had not completed what this incarnation was about. So I was very, very upset. And not that I knew what the incarnation was supposed to be about. I just realized I hadn't completed it. And I had these thoughts going like, I don't want to go back and do childhood again. I don't want to incarnate and go through all that again. I got to get back there and pick up where I left off and finish what I came to do.
Well, this tunnel was familiar.
Pardon me?
This tunnel was familiar.
Oh, it was very familiar. This space was so known to me. Yeah. Now, I'm also aware as a researcher that this response of wanting to return to my human life is not a common response for a lot of NDEs. Most people return, as you probably know, because they're told it's not their time. No one was telling me it's not my time. In fact, I didn't have any interaction with any beings other than when I entered into that light, I felt the pulsing warmth, strength, power, wisdom. It was just like, at that point when I was totally in the light, I was like, okay, if I don't go back, I'm totally cool.
So you was in the tunnel and then bam in the light, like you.
I just gradually went into the light.
Gradually?
I mean, it wasn't a bam. It was like, okay, there's the light. I'm going into it. I'm into it. My sensorial experience changed, more sublime feelings, more deep sense of love, more sense of belonging. That sense of oneness and belonging is so powerful. I've never had that experience here. I've had some meditations
this is
here.
Heaven?
Well, I mean, I think heaven is a loaded term. I don't think this is, I mean, I know there's more. I know this, even in that light, that I would go somewhere else after that light. And I think if you wanted to call that heaven, this was still a journey to heaven. I think when you go into that light, my sense was you would go into that light, into another dimension, and then you'd go through all.
So you had since maybe a holding place or something, like there would be more if you continue.
Yeah.
This way.
Yeah. And then, my whole thing, is that as I've done my own regressions and worked with these other spiritual experiences, that you go through that light and then, you meet your guides, you have a purification. What Catholics, I grew up Catholic, what Catholics call a limbo and or purgatory, two different states. I think those are actually there for some of us. They're not often recorded in the NDE in a certain way. Eben Alexander kind of had what I've talked about him with this about his earthworm eye view is kind of purgatory.
Yeah.
Before he got it figured out.
He was in like the mud.
Yeah, the muck. Yeah, that's very purgatory.
Yeah.
And I didn't have that. I mean, I might when I die, but I didn't have that then. But I had a sense that I knew what was beyond that light. The light was just a beautiful, welcoming. Although I also realized that even though it felt like I had a choice, maybe I did. I mean, because I was pleading with God, and then all of a sudden, I felt the loving presence and embrace of the light, which I called God, and I was, very, very happy and content. But then I felt the pushback on my body, and I started moving away from the light, heading back in the direction of planet Earth. And I realized, I'm going back. And I said,
There was
thank you.
no words said or anything.
Let me get there. I said, thank you. I said, thank you. And then in that, right after that, thank you, there was a long pause. And then I heard telepathically, make something of your life. It was like my wish was granted. And then, but also with a reminder, make something of your life. So I came back. It was a long way back. I mean, I didn't know how I was going to get back. And I realized, whoa, all of a sudden I realized, oh, wait a minute. I'm on this kind of energetic line that's pulling me. And I could just relax and it was taking me right back. But here again, everything's in reverse. I'm seeing a beautiful solar system. I think I even saw more of my life review, but not in as much forceful. It was less important to me this time, the next time around. So I was more focused on how I was going to get back to Earth. I did see planet Earth in the distance. I thought, wow, how am I going to get to like North America, let alone, Squaw Valley and the ski slope? Well, I realized, oh, there's some divine intelligence here that's guiding all this. And so eventually I see the ski slope and I'm like, okay. And I land back in my body, boom. But I have no feeling. The light comes on bright. I have no feeling. And I said, God, don't let me be paralyzed. And then I felt feeling come across my body. And I said, thank you, God. And then my buddy who I was skiing with, John, slides up next to me and sprays me with snow and says, dude, that was a wipeout. So all this happened in a matter of, 15 seconds to a minute or so.
Dude, that was a wipeout.
Yeah. And so I didn't know at the time that I'd had a severe injury. But I did actually, as a 17-year-old would do, with the adrenaline coursing in my body, I skied down, which was not a good thing to do. And I found out that I fractured two vertebrae in my sacral joint. And my orthopedic surgeon, who was a neighbor, told me that he had me come over to his house after I did the X-ray that day, and he said, "Come on over. I want to show you this." He put it up on his X-ray screen in his house. He said, "Yeah." He said, "You were 1/32 of an inch away from being a paraplegic." And he says, "Let me say, this was a significant crunch, lumbar compression." So I was like, "Whoa, okay." He said, "Well, you're gonna be in pain for a while. We're gonna put you in a corset. Don't let anyone do surgery on you, and well, hopefully you'll heal. The data says that you could have a pretty significant healing." And I said, "Okay, whatever." So there I was. I went about my life. I did not think about that near-death experience for at least into my mid-20s. So I was 17. So I don't exactly know what happened, but I do remember being at my parents' home and channel surfing one night. This could have been, my late college years. So it could have been like 4 or 5 years later. And I remember hearing, as I was channel surfing, this voice of a movie actor, a man, say, "And then there was this tunnel and the light." And that's what I heard just as I was channel surfing through. And I go, tunnel, light. My mind captured. Remember, I turned back and this guy's recounting his near-death experience. And I thought my body lit up with, just like that energetic rush. I've had this. Somebody's had this. I know what he's talking about. And I went upstairs and shared it with a family member. And they just kind of said, "Oh, that's kind of interesting. What do you want for dinner?" So really not much affirmation. And I didn't know how to explain it. I didn't know if I thought I was crazy. I mean, whatever. It just didn't go anywhere. But this experience changed me dramatically, because for one, I lost my physical health. I was never able to really run again. I was an athlete, quite skilled athlete, so I lost that identity. I tried to keep up with my friends doing things, but it was always painful. And I had a lot of emotional grief, pain, and suffering around the loss of my healthy body. And no one really knew how to help me as the years went on. And, but I made some rather significant decisions. I think I'll share an experience I had when I was in Europe one summer. I was traveling as we did during those days, in between junior and senior year. And I had a backpack that was a special backpack that rested on my hips, not on my shoulders. And I could do that okay. It was painful, but I could do it. But I remember being in being in Greece, and we wanted to get up to Hungary, Budapest. But in those days, that was Yugoslavia that you had to travel through. And I was interested in seeing this beautiful town we'd heard about, but no information on, Dubrovnik in Yugoslavia on the Adriatic Sea. But there was no map. There was no nothing. Our guidebook, which was Let's Go Europe, did not have anything behind the Iron Curtain listed. So we took an overnight bus ride from Athens, heading north. And we just knew that it was heading north and it was going to go by Dubrovnik at some point. That's all we knew. There was no other information. We barely spoke the language. We were, 21, 22 years old. So what the hell? And as I woke up in the morning after the long bus ride, I pulled the sash, and what I saw out of the bus window was a plaza filled with Muslim women with burqas on, and all I could see was their eyes. That's all I could see. And one woman, they all had their hands outstretched, begging. They were begging for food, for money. A lot of them had babies either in front or in their back, and these, the way they carried them close to their body with their beautiful tapestries wrapped around them, baby carriers. And I was just arrested. My heart was just broken open because I looked at one woman's eyes, and she was just had the most vulnerable, desperate pleading for help, food, whatever. I was so touched by that. And, I've spent many years working out why that was so meaningful to me. And I think that it's because their vulnerability and desperation was so raw, and it connected with mine, but mine was so hidden behind a young man who was trying to hide pain rather than, own it and be with it. So in that moment, I made the most kind of spiritual, I might say, commitment to myself. I said, I don't know what I'm experiencing, but all I know is my heart is opening, and I need to be with people like this. I need to be with people in my own mind who were disenfranchised, who were under-resourced, who were poor in our kind of, lexicon of that day. And I made a commitment to be with those people. And as such, after I graduated from college, which was just a year later, I went to work in Central and South America, first to Belize, then to Guatemala, and then to Peru as part of the Jesuit International Volunteer Corps, the liberal arm of the Catholic Church. And I had my eyes opened over and over again as I taught, first as a teacher in the local high school there, also worked with refugees at different times, both Guatemala and Peru were in civil wars, so things were tense. People were scared, and there was a lot of violence, people displaced, hunger, suffering, disease. And I was there for 3 or 4 years in different places. And I was in pain the whole time with my back. I eventually came back because I was in that much pain. But I sincerely had found a meaning and purpose that was so um, inspiring to me. I felt like I was really using my life well at that time. So I came back from Peru, and I studied systematic theology and philosophy in Graduate Theological Union at Berkeley, really to figure out the profound experiences I've had. Took a course on mysticism and thought that that was really related to my NDE experience, although no one really gave any validation to the NDE. But it just made sense to me that these mystics had similar experiences. You know, they felt the light, they felt their heart open, and so like, oh, so similar. And then I was working at the St. Anthony's Foundation in San Francisco while I was a graduate student, working with refugees from Central and South America. I was hired because I was fluent in Spanish, but I didn't have a licensed counseling degree. They just hired me because I was fluent in Spanish. But then while I was there in inner city San Francisco, the AIDS epidemic, as we call it now, broke out. And it broke out in a big way. Like, we were in the Skid Row part of San Francisco called the Tenderloin. And what happened was all these gay men were losing their employment and their income. And so they ended up moving out of their apartments, having to move out of the apartments, and then moved to Skid Row to homeless shelters, to where they would live in these awful, rental hotels, rent by the week or month, and they were dying. And there were homeless encampments too. And it was there that I met, working with these communities quite closely, I realized that, I was just drawn to both the suffering and desperation, my desire to help, but also to learn about what this process of dying is about. And these were ugly deaths in these days, with Kaposi's sarcoma, the lesions, the pussing. These were really awful deaths. And I was, privy and present to, many of them, but I also really helped the different communities who were caring for their dying brothers, as they called them. And one morning, Brad came in, and Brad was somebody I'd worked with for quite some time. And he was kind of a death doula or a death midwife, or maybe what you'd call a psychopomp, one who helps the dying, one who manages this process of transporting a soul, spirit, consciousness into the afterlife. And he had this kind of common simplicity to him that belied a deep spiritual knowledge for this skill to help his brothers around death and dying. Well, he came in early, first thing in the morning, and he said to me, I said, Brad, you look so beleaguered. What happened? And he said, oh, Randy died last night. I go, oh, Randy, I'm so sorry. He goes, yes, I am too, but it was so beautiful. And I said, Randy, death was beautiful? I go, tell me. Now, he'd been caring for Randy, had been declining and really, actively dying for a number of days, and if not weeks. What he described was, as Randy was dying, his brothers, as he called them, were gathered around in a circle, or just supporting him. It made me seem like it was kind of a circle. And it was a homeless encampment, so there was a fire, burning there in the burned out kind of building in what is now South of Market. Now South of Market's really nice. In those days, it was rather, not a good part of town. So he said, all of a sudden, I saw Brad moving up this cylinder of light. And I thought, oh my God, he's traveling up the fire. And then he realized, wait a minute, that light is not the fire light. That's a different light, and it's coming down from above. And he said, then all of a sudden, Brad was fully ensconced in this light, and he looked down at the brothers, and he said, thank you. Thank you for caring for me. And Randy at this point, as Brad described him, was young, healthy, vibrant, and ecstatically happy. He told them, I am so glad to be free of that body. I love you all. Goodbye. And then he just moved up that cylinder of light into the heavens. And so when Brad shared that with me, he was weeping and I was weeping. I'm like, what a beautiful story. He says, yeah, I've seen that before. Well, this is a shared death experience. This is where I heard my first shared death experiences. And since they were so similar to my NDEs, I knew they were real. I had no doubt in them. I actually shared it kind of with a colleague and he didn't make much of it. No one seemed to do much with these experiences. They just didn't have a context, but I knew they were real. So I was fascinated by them. Well, a few years later, I'm now teaching school in Oakland for Teach for America in a very poor part of Oakland called, was the Elmhurst District, or also known as the Kill Zone. High rates of violence and fatalities there. And I was working really hard, teaching a lot of classes, and I was feeling really tired one weekend and in February. And I went to the emergency room because I started seeing some dots on my hand. And my brothers, who's a doctor, said, if you start seeing red dots, go to the emergency room. So I did. And next thing I knew, when I put myself into the emergency room, I passed out and I woke up about 10 hours later on the ceiling of the ICU at Kaiser Hospital in Oakland. And I'm very much at peace, very content. I am an observing self without any attachment to a body. I'm just there. And I'm watching the nurses talk about the patients, and I'm seeing the janitors do their thing. And I'm moving freely across the ceiling of the ICU with no sense of an identity, but just an unnamed, unidentified, roving consciousness. And I was loving it until I heard the nurses say, oh, this person in bed 1 has had a heart attack. He's going to likely die by tomorrow. The woman in bed 2 had a stroke. She's not doing well. Then there's a guy in bed 3. He's a young guy. He's in his 30s. No past record of anything but some physical pain in his back. But otherwise, he's just super good shape. We don't know what he's doing here. He's got idiopathic thrombocytopenia. And he's close to death because his platelets aren't clotting and he's in danger for drowning. And I'm like, wow, who is that guy over there in bed 3? So I went over there, I looked at the guy in bed 3 and I go, oh my God, that's me. I remembered my life, and so later the doctor would, and then I just went about my business after that. I didn't keep my attention for very much longer, but then the doctor came in. And doctor tapped on me. And as he tapped on me, I realized I had a choice because he got my attention by tapping on me and I'm up above. And I'm thinking, am I going to go back into this body? I thought, well, I don't even know how I would go back into that body. And so I just decided, as he's asking me questions, to go, Mr. Peters, I decide to go back into the body. I decided just to answer him. I decided just to answer him. I didn't decide to go back into my body. I just said, well, what happens if I just kind of try to answer him? And as I did say, yes, like that, it was kind of a drawn out, yes. I felt myself enter into my body and start filling it out energetically. So
those times at the end of your NDE, you were wondering how to get back.
What's that?
Both of your NDEs, before you went back, you were trying to figure out how to get back.
Yeah, I wasn't so interested in getting back the next time. The second time, I just was going to answer his question and see what happened. And as I answered the question, I filled back in my body. I incarnated again. And I answered a few of his questions and that was it. And I think I might have popped out of my body again after that because I have a recollection of a pretty long time in which I was hovering above my body. So I could have been going back and forth. I don't know. That was it. That's all I remember. And then, you know, and then I spent the next couple of days in the ICU recovering, and then I was in the general hospital for a couple of days, and then they released me. And I didn't think about that experience at all either. I shared it with maybe some friends, but no one knew anything about it. So it wasn't until there were a couple experiences in my family where my grandmother was dying, and she was having what we call pre-death visions and visitations. She was talking to, some deceased friends and relatives like this. I got really fascinated in what happens around death and dying. And I decided to take a job at Zen Hospice Project in San Francisco, very progressive hospice. And as I'm working there, as a volunteer, actually, so my only job is to sit at the bedside of people who are dying. And this was at a San Francisco General Hospital. Well, it was at the San Francisco Laguna Honda Hospital, which is the public hospital. So very under-resourced people. It's for people, indigent people. It's their inpatient hospice, 24 beds, open ward. Good place to be around death and dying because there's lots of people dying. So I was sitting there with Ron one afternoon, as I had done many afternoons during the previous weeks as he was dying. And I was reading him a story. And we know in hospice that hearing is the last sense door to close. So I was reading to him. And as I'm reading, I pop out of my body. And I am above my body and his body. And we're together. I'm looking down at my body. I haven't even stopped reading. I'm reading. I can see that I'm reading. I think I'm reading. See the top of my head. And Ron, who's unresponsive, important to note, Ron is unresponsive. He has not been responsive for days, if not a week or so. And then I look over to my right, and there's Ron. Ron is suspended next to me. I can see his big face, his big wide eyes shining. His teeth are beautiful. He's smiling. And he's communicating with me telepathically as if to say something like, hey, check this out. This is where I've been hanging out. So that was just an amazing experience. But I was very comfortable being there because I'd had a previous NDE that I just shared about being in the hospital, hovering above my body. And I was like, wait a minute. I know this space, this out-of-body space. I didn't even have the term out of body. Now I know it's a term out of body, but I was like, I know what this is like to be above your body. And so I was there for a while, and then I came back and I shared it with my trusted supervisor, Eric, who I loved. He was a great guy. And I told Eric, hey, I was with Ron. And I got to tell you this, it sounds kind of weird, but I feel like I popped out of my body and I was with Ron together. We were both above our bodies. I was looking down at my body and his body. And Eric looks over at me and says, hey, halfway between heaven and earth, a lot of things can happen here. Phenomena rolling by, let it go. Mary needs you in bed 3. I'm like, whoa, okay, but this is real. I mean, it was a very Buddhist, we're all Buddhists, we're trained. Our practice is to let go of phenomena. But I was like, wait a minute, this is a whole nother deal. So I learned not only was there not a name or label for this experience, but no one was that interested in it, and seemingly so.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't for another 10 years, no, 8 years, that I waited, and I finally went to a conference with Raymond Moody. He was presenting. I thought Raymond was going to talk about the NDE. But as he starts out, he says, well, tonight I'm going to talk about another experience that's very similar to the NDE. And it's called the shared death experience, or SDE. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. Well, he starts describing these experiences. He says, an SDE is this experience where somebody dies and a caregiver, loved one, or healthcare provider expresses that they feel like they shared in the afterlife, shared in the journey to the afterlife with the person dying. And the phenomena are very similar to the NDE. And in fact, our research, Raymond and I's research, has actually borne that out. that the NDE and the SDE are identical in terms of possible phenomena. Well, it makes sense. We're looking at the same landscape, this spiritual, disembodied, non-incarnate landscape that exists for the soul, spirit, consciousness right after human death and into the initial stages of the afterlife. So I talked to Raymond, had a nice conversation with him there, and I said, I am fascinated by this. I know all about this. I'm going to tell you something else. He says, I think I know how to make these experiences happen. And he says, well, if you do, he says, that's wonderful, because there's very little research on it. We don't know why they happen to some and not to others. So, I'm happy to support you in conducting that research. Anyway, this began kind of a relationship with Raymond and I, where he wasn't involved with the research, but he was very supportive. And I would ask him questions and things like that. And, eventually he came out to Santa Barbara and really helped motivate our research project. But, so this brings us up to present day, where I started a research project, the Shared Crossing Research Initiative. And now we've collected over 250 odd accounts with more that we've processed and analyzed, published in the American Journal of Hospice and Palliative Medicine. And this is really important because now these experiences are recognized by medical sciences as legitimate phenomena. And published the book that you mentioned, At Heaven's Door, What Shared Journeys to the Afterlife Teach About Dying Well and Living Better, where I put together 28 of what I think are some of the most compelling, beautiful, awe-inspiring shared death experiences. So all of that, yeah. And so now, created the first typologies about these, all research-based. So this is the work that I'm doing now. And I should say, I've had a variety, many shared death experiences, both at Zen Hospice, where I had more after the first one with Ron. I've had them with, friends and family as well. And I had one recently with my father that I actually feature in my book, that is really beautiful, that when at the moment of death, before he died, I should say, I saw my grandmother and my aunt, who I knew from my life, but I also encountered my grandfather who had died before I was born. So it was, and other beings were there as well. And there was this beautiful moment in that shared death experience. This happened, about 20 minutes before he died, actually. That I said, why aren't you taking him? He's ready. My father had Alzheimer's for the last 5 years of his life, and he was totally unconscious. This happened during COVID, only a couple of years ago. In fact, a couple of years ago in September. And so he was just ready to go, and he was labored breathing, and we were just wanting him to move on into heaven, if you will. And they said to me, my aunt and my grandmother, who are very close together, just communicated to me, we're waiting for him to come. We're the welcoming party, but we're not in charge. And then they directed my attention to just above my father, as if to say, he's in charge. And I said, he's in charge? Who's that? And then I moved my attention over to just above my father's body, in the middle of his body, because my aunt and grandmother and grandfather were at the foot of the bed, elevated. So over the top of him, so to speak, over his belly, where I was closer to me, when I locked my attention into that, moved my gaze and moved my energy into relationship with that, I felt this huge, powerful force. And I got it. I said, oh, there's this source here that's managing his transition, who's in charge of his transition. And I had seen that in my research before many times, and I was working with and still am, developing a full description of this type of being that I now call the conductor. That force that conducts, that manages the transition of souls and spirits from the human life into the afterlife. So I felt this conductor. And the conductor, from my research now, is seen as invisible, but as well as visible. And sometimes it's felt by the experiencer and sometimes not. And maybe the conductor's not there all the time, but I think that that there's this force there in
Yeah.
charge, whether we notice it or not. So yeah, so that, and I have other experiences as well, but geez, Peggy, that's probably a good place to stop.
Okay.
Let me know what you're thinking. You
Oh,
any questions or?
I had just talked again on the podcast last night, um, that about my shared death experience I had with my ex mother-in-law. I didn't know what those was called. I didn't understand it. It freaked me out. So, yeah,
Yeah, so you've had one, so you know about these. That's beautiful.
yeah.
Did it leave you with a good feeling?
It freaked me out. It scared me. It made me nervous, but I was kind of laughing too because it was so shocking. And of course, back then I had nobody to share these with, to talk to anybody about it. But then she started visiting me at night. And so finally one night I got up and I said, "Come on, Mary." And I walked in the living room, got out of the bedroom, went in the living room and sat down, turned on the light, got out the family Bible, because her and her husband were my godparents when I got confirmed Catholic and when I was married to their son. And so I got out that Catholic family Bible and I went back to the blank pages and I said, "I'll write down everything you say, everything you tell me." And then this vision come and it showed me a memory when I was at their house of this conversation, and it let that, remembering that, let me know how much they loved me, because in that memory it was a day when I had walked in their house and she was doing dishes, her husband was standing by the phone. I could still see the yellow phone on the wall, and her husband turned around and said to me, "You are our Loretta." Loretta was their daughter that was stillborn. They had 12 kids, but this one would have been my age. So it was like their second or third last child. And said, "You're our Loretta." And I looked at him like, "What?" I'm in my early 20s. Like, "What?" And he says, "Yeah." He says, "Me and Mommy talked about it, and you're our Loretta." And I looked over at her, thinking, is he drunk again? Because he was so serious. And she says, "Yeah, that's right." I turned around and walked out. I scoffed at him. This is the memory when I said, "Okay, Mary, tell me what you had to say. I got this vision." And I was like, and it just let me know they loved me. And I wrote down some things that I was understanding, and it's still in that Bible. But yeah, I felt like it was their way of, no, am I not physically their Loretta, reincarnated? They love me because he says, "You're our Loretta." Says, "You look like you could be our daughter. We love you like a daughter. You're our Loretta." And that was their way of saying, "We love you."
Beautiful.
Uh,
Yeah, I wouldn't be so focused and dedicated my professional career to the shared death experience, but for the healing benefits and positive after effects. I mean, I'm a psychotherapist. I specialize in end of life and grief and bereavement. I work with families who have, real difficult situations with loved ones dying, often of terminal diseases, cancers, and what have you. And then I work with them often right through death and dying into the grief and bereavement stage for the surviving loved ones. And when you have an SDE, you have this sense, this knowing, as we see in the research, knowing that your loved one is alive and well, knowing that you'll be reunited with them again. You cease to have fear or anxiety about an afterlife. Your grief and bereavement process is you still, are heartbroken for the loss, but you have a larger context that allows you to hold the loss in that's, it sounds something like, "I really miss you, but I know I'll see you again, and that's okay." And that people really feel like these experiences positively transform their lives so that they do things that are more in integrity with who they really are. So yeah, so that's what makes them so compelling, and so that's why I want to teach about them, is because of the positive after effects.
yeah, yeah. Was there anything else you'd like to share that we didn't get to cover, or a lasting thought?
Yeah, I mean, I just think, thank you to your audience and to you for having me on your show. And I can't think of anything else. Oh, I know one other thing. If if your listeners are interested in how to have these experiences, I have, as I said, when I first met Raymond, what I said to Raymond is, not only do I know about these, I know how to have them. I know how to enable them for people. And that was quite a bold statement that I made, but it was true. It was just a download that came up to me in that moment. I was just speaking from integrity. Well, I have developed these programs now, and one of them is called The Pathway. shared crossing pathway. And it's where over a 3-day intensive workshop, I teach people how to have this experience, the shared death experience. And what we found is about 25 to 50%, you don't know, it's a big number in that range, will have an SDE soon after, you know, when they're around a death of somebody. And about 80 to 90% will have some other deathbed visitation or vision after the death of a loved one. So anyway, we teach how to have these in intensive, and it's beautiful work, and people really love it. A series of guided visualizations, interpersonal exercises, contemplation, meditation. People just say that as they're doing this, the vibration in the room during the time that we train or do this workshop just rises, and then I demonstrate how to have them, and I help people choreograph their own end of lives where they can have the SDE and visitation. So it's pretty exciting. So if people are interested, we do it in person in Santa Barbara, but we also do it online for with some frequency. So we're starting it online pretty soon. So
I'd like to share something with you real quick that you might want to share with your people that you teach.
Yeah.
I did with my second mother-in-law, my husband's mother. She passed away 3 years ago. We'd often talked about maybe me writing a little memoir for her. We just never got around to it. And then she was sent home, and the doctor says Janice Coleman died, and she's a former nurse. So I was sitting by, but it happened faster than what we thought. Within the end of the week, here she is on that final deathbed. And we could tell because she had seen her mother and said, her mother says, Janice, don't get in a hurry, her dead mother. And so I took that as a cue. We got a little bit of time here. And so I grabbed a notebook and I went over and I said, Janice, we talked about doing me doing a little memoir. I said, let's do that now. And she's okay. And I knew it was going to be a short version, and she was getting very weak. And so what I did was I walked her home. I didn't realize it at the time, but then when I was done, I just walked her home. I got a notebook and I said, what's your earliest memory? Because that's how I started my memoir. And she says, my dad. She says, I remember him carrying me up in his neck, and and she would stare at the ceiling as she did it. And I could tell she was like so close to her dad. And she was remembering it. Like she was there. And then she went, and I just let her, I didn't, force anything. I just let her go. And then she says, then she went to another memory. And the whole time she stared at the ceiling. And she was in these memories. I felt like I was in her life review, assisting her life review.
Yeah.
And not as like, what'd you do wrong and all that, but her reviewing her life. And we went through, and I did ask a few questions. I think at the end I said, what do you want us to know? What do you want for us? And she said, I want for all of you to be as happy as Dad and I was. And so she passed like the next day. And it was like, not much communication come from her after that. I mean, she got, very bad. And so the morning of her funeral, I woke up and I just knew I had to read what I wrote at her funeral and end up being her eulogy. And when it was over, the woman was very popular in the community, being a nurse and bus driver and 4-H leader and all. And so it was packed. And so when it was over, everybody was so quiet, and they walked over, and a lot of them just looked at me, and they said, her brothers, and people who were close to her said, we didn't hear your voice or see you. We heard her voice and saw her when you were talking, because I was pretty much quoting her, dictating, as she said this. And as I'm reading it, I was feeling like I was her presenting this. I felt something going on, and it was beautiful.
Yeah.
It was
Beautiful. Wow.
And I thought, I wish I could go around and do that to everybody. Or if people knew, this is an option. You could do this when you know they're on their deathbed. Just start that process of their best memories and what do you want to leave us. And then if somebody could read that at the funeral, because it worked out so well.
Yeah, we have an exercise like that as part of the Pathway program. It's a little different,
Awesome.
but it really does kind of crystallize the meaning and purpose of the person's life. This is all preparation for what we call a conscious, connected, and loving end of life experience.
And it makes it a beautiful death. And it makes it a beautiful funeral.
Yeah, no, it really does. It's we call that preparing for a graceful death and a grace-filled death.
Mhm. I turned to my husband after it happened. I said, I think I just walked your mother home.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting terminology you're using because that's what Ram Dass says. He says, at the end of life, we just walk each other home.
Really?
A home being the realm of spirits. So yeah,
Yeah, we don't want anybody to be afraid, angry, kicking and screaming. I mean, if you can make it graceful and meaningful,
yeah.
so you
Well, good. So if, one thing, that story you sold is really beautiful. And, I think maybe your listeners will be interested in At Heaven's Door, my book, because that's what I really try and do is just tell these stories. And what I hear over and over again is that people say, wow, I was reading through those stories and following your guidance and seeing how you kind of put them into a really organized typology. I realized that I could have this. Like these people were just like me. They were normal, everyday people, and they had this extraordinary shared death experience. I said, yeah, that's what we're trying to teach everybody is that, and you're trying to do here, Peggy, is wake people up to the possibility that these experiences are available and there are processes and steps that can be taken to enable them. So, and we serve as a resource. Share Crossing Project is a resource to people, sharecrossing.com. We're also on social media, Twitter and Facebook. You can find us, and we do lots of community events. Some of them, some of them are free, some are paid, but we give people. We got a story library. That's one thing your listeners might like. A story library at sharedcrossing.com where you can just listen to stories of shared death experiencers from our research. Now we've interviewed, like I said, a couple hundred plus people, and we then take these interviews that are videotaped and put them into 5-minute segments or so people can listen to these beautiful stories edited down. Um,
and
so
see,
yeah, well,
too
good.
many people are afraid of talking about their death. I mean, these might be nice to watch and like entertainment, but as their death, but I think it is important. Like just got in my 60s now, and I think, okay, I taught my sons to walk and talk and drive a car and help them with raising their children and all these things, college and all these things we go through life teaching them. And I feel it's going to be my responsibility when I pass away to show my sons how we do it, how we die with a smile on our face. I want to do that for my kids, because when it comes to their time, I'm sure they're going to reflect back to mom and they're going to think, she died with a smile on her face. She died saying, I'll see you there, and not this tragic, awful, and fear and dread. That's what I want to do. So I love what you're
Beautiful.
doing.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we're on the same page on that one. Just trying to help people have the most grace-filled death they can have. And it does take preparation that you don't get to have those end-of-life experiences without some preparation. That's not to say the shared death experience happens more or less for most of the people we're interviewing, naturally, kind of. We don't know why some people have and others don't. I do think preparation helps. As I said, our training tends to help. Also, meditation, prayer, good prayer practice, talking to your relatives on the other side as a way of preparation. All of this, I think, increases the probability of having a shared death
Do you
experience.
think having an NDE increases your probability?
I do because I think it teaches you the landscape. You're more, and it's an energetic landscape. It's like, you've already kind of been in the veil, if you will. You've crossed the veil in your near-death experience. I've done it twice, as you know, and and so it makes it easier to navigate and feel safe and familiar with this landscape.
I wonder if when we have our NDE, it doesn't leave like a little hole, passageway to go back, slip out easier again.
Oh, I
Like you
think
were
that's.
with
I
that
think that,
guy and you just went. I mean, you weren't dead, you weren't sick, you just went. And like when I touched my, ex mother in law's arm, it was just like picking up a phone. We just started chatting, and so
yeah,
and I look back over time, and I think it makes it easier each time. And as I get older, I feel like these things happen so easily.
I think you're right. I think there's definitely a correlation between, um, in one study, we found we studied 167 cases and about 107 experiencers. In other words, so the 107 experiencers had 167 cases. So that means, over half, most of these people, not most, but some of these people had more than one SDE. If we have 107 in our interview and we have 167 cases, something like that, that means a lot of people are having more than one SDE. So there's definitely a proclivity once you've had one to have another one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. It's been a very good interview. I appreciate it. I need
Thank
it.
you, Peggy. Appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.